Good morning, everybody. My name is Doug Reeves at the Leadership and Learning Center, and I'm very happy to introduce my colleague, Dr. Cathy Lassiter. Dr. Lassiter is the creator of the center's new 10-part leadership program called Leaders Developing Leaders. We'll have more to say about that in a moment, but first of all, I just wanted to say welcome, Cathy.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So a couple of just administrative notes before we get underway with the webinar. I want to, number one, let you know that we are serious about putting our personal emails up there. If there are questions that you want to ask that you don't have the opportunity to get our answer for today, please feel free to email either one of us. In addition, I'd like to welcome you to the Senior Leadership Institute that's coming up in June, where not only will Cathy be presenting, but also Brian McNulty, Ainsley Rose, and myself, where you'll have an opportunity to, in a very small environment, have an opportunity, usually only a few dozen people. So it's not the giant keynote, not the impersonal setting that sometimes you experience in professional development, but a much more conversational and intimate opportunity. In addition, we really practice what we preach when it comes to professional learning, and that is not just an event, but follow-up. And so every participant in the Senior Leadership Institute will also have the opportunity for personal one-to-one follow-up, or if you prefer, with your leadership team throughout the year. A couple of additional notes. The Leadership Summit, many of you have emailed me in the last few weeks asking, when can you see John Hattie? And here's the answer. He's going to be in the last week of June in one of his rare North American appearances. And if you haven't heard John Hattie, I just really want to recommend him to you. He's an extraordinary researcher and an engaging and witty presenter, really bringing an international perspective to the table. And I hope you'll have the opportunity to see him as well. The Principals Leadership Institute is also coming up in July. And we particularly are focusing on the term activating. That's a term that is inspired by Hattie, and we want to turn research into action in that event. For a minute, I want to begin by asking you a question. And I'm going to put a poll up on the screen here. And ask you about your greatest challenges. Take just about 30 seconds. You can answer more than one if you wish. There we go. I didn't mean to close that quite so early. If you'll just be patient with me, I will try to do it again. So let's take a look at what you had to say. The vast majority of you clearly are concerned about creating a high-performing school culture. And all of these things are important, but one of the things that my most recent research on change leadership has revealed is that if we don't, if we talk about change and are not willing to change culture, then culture beats policy every time. Even when people change their policies, if they don't work on changing culture, including cultures of feedback and culture of challenge, then we don't get very far. So let's proceed with our research today and talk about leaders developing leaders. Cathy, I'm going to ask you to begin by talking about why support for leadership is so important.
Okay. Just to give a brief overview of the program, the Leaders Developing Leaders Seminar Series was developed by the Center's consultants who have served in leadership positions all across the country. So that's why it's called Leaders Developing Leaders. We took the best that we have at the Leadership and Learning Center to sit down and go through the research, to talk about their experiences, and to take those experiences in working with school leaders and central office leaders to develop a set of sort of a portfolio of 10 seminars that we believe will help principals and central office leaders meet the greatest challenges coming forward. And our poll results really show that some of these seminars are of great interest. For example, creating a high-performing school culture, 60%. I was surprised by that. I knew it was a great need, but not such an overwhelming number. So the Leaders Developing Leaders Seminar Series has a seminar designed to help school leaders understand that there are key elements in leadership that will lead to a high-performing school culture. So over the next 2 webinars, today and on April 9th, we're going to be sharing information from at least 4 of the 10 seminars, and then maybe if there's interest, we will continue to offer webinars on the remaining seminars within the portfolio of offerings that we have. So again, this is really designed to support our leaders with the leadership practices that they feel they need the greatest support on. So for today,
Kathy,
we're going to
Kathy, before you proceed, some people are having a little trouble with the audio, so if you can be as close as possible to the speaker, that would be great.
Sure. I hope this is better. I'm very, very close to the phone. I had a hard time dialing in this morning for some reason. So here, what you see on the screen is the framework for Leaders Developing Leaders, and it's got 3 main categories of seminars that we're offering. Today, our information is going to focus on the teaching and learning piece of the work, and we'll do 2 to give you an overview and some really good information on 2 of those seminars. Today, we'll be talking about the instructional leader and the data leader. There are 2 additional seminars within that piece of the work. That would be the standards leader and the learning leader. But today, we're going to focus on instructional leader and data leader. Okay, so for our instructional leader, what we're going to focus on today will be the essential knowledge that school leaders need in order to be effective instructional leaders. So know that this seminar contains a great deal of contemporary research, which we'll hit a little bit today, as well as a section on essential knowledge and one on essential skills, and then a planning segment about how to create time in a principal's very busy schedule to be a strong instructional leader. So the research on the instructional leadership seminar is based on Viviane Robinson's findings as well as numerous other pieces of contemporary research. But I put this one in particularly because I think it's so telling on the behaviors and actions a principal can take that will have the greatest impact on student learning in their school. And so as we look at Viviane Robinson's research, this original research was 2008, but she has a 2011 publication, which you see on the screen, Student-Centered Leadership, which really goes in depth to all of these 5 findings. But leading teacher learning and development, as you can see, has twice the effect as the other leadership behaviors that you see on the screen. And when principals are pressed for time and wondering what can they do, what behaviors should they engage in to get them the greatest outcome on student learning, it is this: sitting with teachers, talking with them about instruction, joining their PLCs or their data teams, walking the building, and walking with a very specific purpose, and that is to discuss and engage in instructional talk with the teachers and the students in the school.
And one thing that I might just insert in terms of the horizontal axis here on effect size, that's an effect on student learning. And the reason effect size is such a helpful data point for leaders to know is that, as John Hattie has said, almost anything has some kind of effect. And so you have a lot of people throwing out, well, I know that this works. Everything works. There's 100 strategies that work. The question is what works best and what has the greatest impact when you as a leader have limited time and resources. So don't settle for somebody saying, I know it works. Press more to get data like this so you know what works best.
Okay, so let's get right into the essential knowledge piece of the instructional leader. And as you can see on the screen, which reflects directly back to Viviane Robinson's findings with leading teacher learning and development, Strong instructional leaders have a thorough understanding of the standards that are expected to be taught both on the state and the local level, the curriculum that provides a framework for those standards to be taught to students and assessed, the instructional pedagogy that teachers are using in the school to make sure that quality lessons are happening every day, assessment of those standards, data collection and analysis, and professional development. So let's go into the first one, Doug. Okay, knowing standards and curriculum. Go ahead. Doug, did you have something?
No, I was just saying that the slide transition is a little slow, so I'll do my best to stay ahead of you.
Okay. So the Common Core state standards have been adopted in 46 states so far, and that is the reason why we have standards here. If you happen to be in one of the states that haven't adopted, then of course your state standards, as they're currently written, would be in the place of Common Core. But it is absolutely critical for principals, school leaders, central office leaders to know the standards and to know the curriculum for which the district has written or the school has written, where those standards are embedded in a progression in a cohesive way from the beginning of school in August or September through May or June. The district standards embedded in that, as well as grade level content that schools feel like they want to interweave into the Common Core standards, are very important for principals to know as they move into classrooms and discuss with teachers the curriculum. Very critical for them to have this information and to be able to speak with knowledge, a depth of knowledge with staff about the standards, the meaning of the standards, and so forth.
And I would just interject, we've surveyed more than 1,000 teachers and what they need in terms of Common Core. The content they know, that's been widely distributed, but the vast majority of them need help on implementation of the Common Core. What does it mean specifically in the classroom? And that is a train wreck waiting to happen for people who think that they can wait until 2014 to address that.
And so going on to how leaders can develop this knowledge, and as Doug indicated, it's the implementation piece that's so critical to successful attainment of the Common Core state standards. And that's going to fall largely on the school principal. So how does the principal lead their staff for the successful implementation of the Common Core standards? A process that we recommend in really learning and understanding those standards is unwrapping and prioritizing with the staff. This process really engages teachers and administrators together in a rich discussion around the full depth and cognitive demands of the Common Core, which is critical. Participating as the leader in any professional development that is provided to teachers in reference to the Common Core, both content and implementation. And of course, principals attending grade level and content level team meetings as they discuss their implementation of the standards and their approach. Following that, of course, has to be quality professional development around the Common Core. So whereas many districts have the opportunity to offer internal professional development, maybe very large districts have that opportunity, but we work with many, many districts that don't have that capacity, where our consultants can come in and work with teachers and principals in particular. We do have a seminar on the standards leader that helps leaders and teachers successfully implement the Common Core. But to be a strong instructional leader, quality professional development has to be provided to staff. So how do we do that? You've got to have a clear vision of what quality instruction looks like for your school. We know the research tells us that principals who are able to rally a staff around a shared vision of quality instruction do quite well, because everybody in the school understands what proficiency looks like, understands what the definition of quality instruction is, and they're all aiming for the same target. A principal who's a strong instructional leader knows the needs of the staff, and it varies from school to school to school. You might have a number of new teachers, a number of veteran teachers with particular experiences, and all of that comes into play as you're providing professional development to take everybody's performance to the next level. Making sure that every presenter, whether they're internal or external, come into the school to work as a partner and not as drive-by staff development, that they're truly there for the principal to achieve the vision and mission of the school and for the staff to raise their level of performance in the classroom. And so, again, strong instructional leaders have that level of professional development. Okay, the next point in the essential knowledge of strong instructional leaders is the understanding and the communication of effective pedagogy. What are those practices, tried and true, research-based practices that we know will make a difference in student learning? And how are those communicated? And how are teachers brought up and instructed on these standards? I haven't met a teacher yet who didn't want to do the best job they could possibly do in the classroom. And where we can provide information and instruction on best practices in the classroom, teachers who use those practices experience great success in the classroom. And so it's the principal's job.
I might just add that one probing question you might want to ask your colleagues is, what do you know now that you didn't 10 years ago? Or what did you think was true 10 years ago that now you think differently about now? If you can't get a good answer to that, and more to the point, if you can't provide it yourself as a leader, then that's a real warning sign that people are stuck in old research or no research, only a belief system. And I would commend to you that the question that Dick Elmore asks, in fact, it's the title of his latest book. I used to think, but now I think, if people can't fill in those blanks, then it's a very, very challenging problem to actually apply the research.
Okay, and so that is a great segue right into how principals can become very knowledgeable with pedagogy, and that is exactly what Doug just said, and that's to stay current in educational research. And so we have talked about John Hattie at the Leadership and Learning Center. His book, probably the most comprehensive and current on instructional practices that carry great impact on student learning. I would recommend the book to all the listeners if you have not gotten a copy yet. And I would also recommend the most current issue of his book, which was Visible Learning, now out, Visible Learning for Teachers in particular, and I would highly recommend that. But for principals developing their skills in pedagogy, certainly observing instruction with either content experts or experts who are very apt at observing instruction and providing quality, timely, specific feedback to teachers for growth. I would highly recommend forming peer groups with principals to conduct observations. A number of principals going in together and sharing their experiences and observing in each other's schools will help you to hone your skills as an observer and as a learner of instructional pedagogy. Talking instruction with your master teachers. They will welcome an opportunity to have a conversation with their principals around instructional practice, and certainly can share the tricks of the trade and the things that they have learned over the years with their principals. And then, of course, seeking feedback from mentors and our coaches that many of our principals have the opportunity to have when it comes to giving feedback to teachers for growth. Well, of course, we can't talk about standards and instruction without also ensuring that we have quality assessments going on in our school. And so how does a principal go about leading their school for quality assessments and understanding where kids are in their learning? So for the how piece of this, again, providing quality professional development for staff and for the principals and learning what it takes to provide quality assessments in the school, reviewing teacher assessments and providing feedback for growth. So actually, collecting assessments, reading them, having conversations with data teams or PLCs about the assessments that are being given, assuring alignment to the standards. So even having the assessments laid out side by side to the standards they are addressing and looking at those unwrapped standards to make sure that all components and levels of thinking have been addressed. And then, of course, discussing assessments with master teachers again, and making sure that that teachers are on point with the assessments, and that the assessments will give them the data they seek about student proficiency levels on the standards that they are teaching.
And Cathy, you've mentioned the importance of discussions with master teachers a couple of times. If I could just briefly amplify, I think a lot of administrators over-observe their underperforming teachers and under-observe their high-performing teachers. In fact, in some places, part of the culture is, once you're really good, you don't need to be observed anymore. I think that's very wrong-headed. You spend more time with your great teachers. In fact, have other people observe great teachers. That observation of our best needs to be part of our culture, not something that people are exempted from after a certain number of years or a certain level of expertise.
Right, and I would echo that as well. As a former principal, I know that I thought I knew a lot about instruction when I became a principal, but certainly time spent with my master teachers was the most valuable experience in deepening my understanding and knowledge about instructional practice. Okay, last one for essential knowledge of instructional leaders, and that's, of course, the use of data-driven decision-making. How do principals go about doing this and making sure that the school is a data-driven school? Convening building-level data teams, most essential, and following a set cycle of inquiry each time, for every meeting, certainly will build the capacity of the principal as well as the staff in really analyzing and, more importantly, using that information to drive instructional decisions and learning best practices for replication, using multiple data points in the meetings, and with the leadership team in particular, using multiple points around student achievement, choosing one or two priorities, and this is where I think many schools take a wrong turn in trying to address everything they see in their data rather than focusing in on one or two high leverage priorities, which will bring them to success in a number of others, and then determining leadership strategies. So in a school, a principal convenes a leadership data team. They look at multiple data points. They select their priorities as a school, and then everybody on that leadership team has a role and a strategy to implement when the meeting is over. And these meetings, they say a rising tide floats all boats. So with everybody at the meeting getting better and stronger at a data team's process, certainly the strategies that are implemented will bring greater results for the entire school.
So it's time for another poll. It's time for another poll, and I'm going to do a better job this time of letting you have some time to answer, telling us what your greatest challenge is as an instructional leader. So let's see if we can launch this one. And while we're waiting to have that launch, we had a person question what the title, the author of the book. I used to think, but now I think that was by Richard Elmore, and E-L-M-O-R-E. It was published by Harvard Education Press. So we'll take about 10 more seconds. And let's take a look at what the results are. I think it's very interesting that a plurality of our respondents talked about time management when, in fact, one of the things that we know is rarely taught at the graduate school level in leadership curriculums is anything about management. It's all about leadership, and yet when I listen to active administrators, time management, people management, project management consume a lot of their attention. Cathy, what do you infer from these results?
Well, I infer that there has been, over the course of the past recent years anyway, 5 years, more and more expected and put on the plates of principals, and they're struggling with how to. I don't think any of our leaders on our webinar today would argue that instructional leadership is the most important job they have. However, they do struggle with managing the operations, managing the people, managing the building, and getting in to do the most important part of their work, which is the instructional piece. And it is a matter of auditing time and looking at how you're spending your time. It's a matter of looking at the jobs that you're engaged in, and do you personally, the principal, have to do those jobs, or can you share leadership and distribute it among the staff? And those, it's going to take a deep look at currently how time is being spent, and then places where time can be carved out to spend more time in instruction, because that's really what will make the difference with their school improvement.
We have a couple of questions, and maybe you're getting to this when you talk about data leader. You mentioned earlier multiple data points. Please say a little bit more about what you mean by multiple data points, both in terms of data from students as well as data from observations of teachers.
Yes. Well, what we're saying is, and this would be at the leadership data team meeting, they're going to look at multiple data points across the school. So those data points would include, if there are district-wide benchmark assessments, certainly those would be looked at. I know some people have district-made or commercially made assessments that they give on a regular basis. This would also mean school-wide assessments that are being given on the grade level, so the formative common assessments that teachers are giving. It would also include data points on attendance, data points on grading, and then, of course, we would look at our implementation of strategies. So we've got our student result data that we're looking at, but then we should also be examining in our team meeting our percentages of implementation of the strategies and programs that we have going on in our school that are supposed to be making a difference with student learning. So not only the student results. Go ahead.
I just, by implementation, I think you also need to be very wary of a claim of we are doing ... which implies that you either do something or you don't. When Cathy talks about implementation, we really mean different levels of implementation, ideally addressed on a rubric, 4, 3, 2, 1. So even someone performing at a high level will acknowledge not every day do we have great engagement. Not every day was feedback at a level 4. The more precisely you can describe effective teaching and classroom environment, the better you can give feedback that is objective and clear. In fact, when it's really good, people are able to give themselves and their peers feedback. It doesn't all fall on your shoulders alone.
Okay, so that's a great movement right into the next seminar that we're going to give an overview on today, and that is the data leader. And as Doug was just saying, the data points that we're going to look at are termed as antecedents in our language, and we'll talk about that one in more depth in a minute, accountability and collaboration. And I think that many times we lose this foundational piece of the reasons for and outcomes expected of our data team's process or PLC's process that people are using. So let's look a little bit more deeply at antecedents and what that means to us. Antecedents of excellence are measurable indicators of leadership, teaching practices, curriculum, parent involvement. It's all of those actions of adults that precede the results that we're getting from students. And if we are not getting the results we want from students, then we have to look at what precedes that, and that would be the actions and strategies that the adults are using that lead to those results. So, we do call them cause indicators, but antecedents being what precedes student outcomes. And if we want to change in outcomes, then many times we have to look at a change in what adults are doing. The next foundational concept for data-driven decision-making is accountability. And we do not mean accountability that your scores are in comparison to other people on the team, or that this is something that's going to show up in the local newspaper on the front page. What we're talking about here is accountability to one another. And when we come together to discuss students, we are accountable to each other as colleagues to give our best effort and to come to agreement on best instructional practices to address the priorities we're seeing in student data. So what are going to be those best instructional practices, and are we going to hold to our agreements as a team of teachers to implement strategies that we have deliberately selected to meet student learning goals? And then, of course, along with that is collaboration and working in collaborative teams, sharing the best that each teacher has to offer, and making very sure that each member on a teacher team is true to the process, is true to themselves, true to each other, and their intentions when they come to the table about improving student learning. All viewpoints and voices should be heard. Strategies and outcome are the focus, and those things added together equal a very effective decision-making process that is in the best interest of students and student learning.
We have an interesting question about what role student conversations play in this process.
Student conversations in reference to data talks?
Well, in regard to pedagogy generally. I mean, one of the interesting things is that students know when they're engaged and when they're not. They know when they're making progress and when they're not.
Absolutely. And so you just broke up a little bit, Doug, but what effective teacher teams do is to share their work with students and have students to give feedback, and students are providing feedback to teachers every day, every minute of class, in their body language and their performance and their oral language with one another. But certainly students should be involved in tracking their own progress and seeing the results of their hard work as well. Okay, so I think we have, after this slide, we have just an overview of the process, the data team's process. We recommend a 6-step process in the analysis of data and decisions based on that data. And when teams come together to perfect this process, they do quite well. We do offer a number of seminars and trainings in reference to the data team's process, and I would like for our webinar participants to take a look at this and to ask themselves, is this process similar to what they're following? And as they look at the collective work of the 6 steps as well as each step individually, what is their level of participation in meetings that require this kind of set cycle of inquiry, and what kind of results are they getting by following this? Because we have found that our teams, once learned and implemented well, wouldn't do business any other way than what you see on the screen.
We have a question from a colleague who's asking, what is the difference, if any, between their professional learning communities and their data teams?
Okay. In data teams, we really require that data be charted and collected, and the step 5, I think, is really going to be the one that is going to set us apart from a professional learning community, and that determine results indicator step really is where the details are provided on the implementation of the strategies. So you're going to select your strategies in step 4, but in step 5 is where we're going to talk about the implementation of those strategies in great detail. What is it going to look like? What's the frequency? Maybe the strategy is going to be used 2 times a week, 3 times a week. What are you going to see teachers doing when they're implementing the strategy correctly? What are you going to see students doing, which is the result that you're looking for from the strategy? And then what is going to be our level of implementation? So as we go through the process and come back together in step 6, we discuss not only the results from students, but we discuss our own implementation and have a frank and honest, candid discussion about the teacher's implementation of a strategy to determine if we can make a correlation between strategies implemented and results received from students.
We have another question about whether we use particular data team protocols, such as a Project Zero. And I think the direct answer is, although we don't use precisely what Project Zero is, it is essential to have protocols, including these 6 steps. If you don't, what too many people do is to only look at the data, but they never get around to actually setting goals and evaluating instructional strategies relative to what the data has to tell them. one more question that I'd like you to address is what you do when people lack both the time and the inclination to actually analyze data, either because they regard the assessment data as flawed or they just don't have the time for it.
Okay, well, let's go for the time first of all. I see teachers meeting after school, before school on their own, even when formal time has not provided. However, different schools have different structures, and teachers meet during planning times or duty times. But I think that, any time that teachers can squeeze out of a day to meet together is time well spent. It's sort of, what you sacrifice on the front end, you get paid for on the back end, because you're getting the benefit of everyone's thinking, and, best practices are more likely to be replicated as you have those conversations with peers. And the other question was what, Doug?
There are teachers who simply don't believe that the tests are valid. They also don't like teaching to the test, and so the whole idea of data analysis, if it involves test scores, is something that they resist from the beginning.
Right. And so then I would say that when you are dealing with unwrapped standards and have a clear idea of the standard that is being assessed, you have teachers around the table who are discussing and debating, and sometimes what type of assessment to create to provide a good read on student proficiency on a particular standard. Those assessments are not designed to have the same reliability and validity as tests coming out of test publishers who have psychometricians and all that. These are just quick assessments to get at student proficiency on one or two skills at a time, and those assessments are very valid in the class, at the classroom level, to determine are students mastering or are students gaining proficiency on just one or two skills and concepts from a particular standard. It's very, very targeted. Okay. To close this particular section off, I have this slide up on here. It's a quote from John Hattie, but the data team's process and John Hattie's work go hand in hand, in that he strongly emphasizes that we as educators need to know thy impact. In other words, we need to know very clearly the impact that we have as adults on student learning, impact in a positive and or negative way, so that we can adjust the actions that we engage in, the behaviors that we exhibit, the strategies that we implement to know impact on students. And when we are able to fully identify our impact in what we do and the results we get from students, the much more effective that we will be in the classroom. So the data leader, if you're a school principal leading you're the leader of instruction, the leader of data in your school. Very important to have processes in place based on sound concepts such as antecedents, accountability, and collaboration, for the goal of knowing thy impact on students. And so before we close this morning, we just want to let you know that we will have another webinar next month on April 9th, and we will focus our two overviews of seminars on school culture, which matches perfectly to the data we received at the beginning of this webinar on the poll, with almost 60% of you saying that creating a high-performing school culture is something that is a challenge for you. So we can definitely address that need in our next webinar, and hope that everyone will be able to join us.
We have some additional questions in this back on data analysis. Some teachers are frustrated because they were analyzing data, but others were frustrated even more because they were not. That is, they spent a lot of time administering assessments, but the analysis was happening at the central office level, not at the classroom level. How would you coach that school to have teachers engaged in that analysis process in a meaningful way?
Right. Coaching teachers in a situation like that, we would bring the assessments that they have available to them. It's no point in giving an assessment if you're not going to get timely feedback as a result. And when you have some people in the central office, I think it's great that they're looking at the data. However, assessments given by teachers need to be analyzed by teachers for the sole purpose of intervening and making a difference with student learning. So we would bring those teachers together around the table on a grade level or in a content level, look at the assessments they have, and implement the data team's process. Go step by step by step in looking at that information for the sole and only purpose of seeing where students are and their proficiency levels on priority standards and what we intend to do about it as educators, and setting a plan in place, implementing our plan and our strategies, and coming together again to see the results. So I'm not sure what the barriers are in getting the data back to the teachers, but the teachers most definitely have control over the data from assessments that they give on the classroom level. And that's really probably where we would start, is looking at what they have, but then digging deeper into assessments that they can get data from immediately.
One resource that you might want to also look at is that we have done some videotapes of effective data teams, and it is really remarkable to hear teachers testify in their own words, no script, nothing staged, how effective that is to look at student work. And what I notice when I look at these videotapes is two things. Number one, there's actually laughter going on, which I suspect is not a term that a lot of people associate with data. But when people are successful and they see progress, they celebrate and they encourage one another. And number two was interesting to me, that the principal was present, but the principal did not dominate the meeting. The principal instead might have asked questions, not be the great data analyst. So it's very helpful to me to look at those tapes, and you can see those at the website, leadandlearn.com. Also, we published things like data team success stories, where you can hear teachers in their own words describe what this process has done for them. Here's another question. Are teacher assessments more reliable than benchmark tests? Certainly hard to generalize about that. I don't think it's an either-or proposition. Teachers ought to be assessing in one way or another and giving feedback every day. When people ask how often should we assess students, I usually say after every meal. Frequent assessment is critical. But there's also a reasonable district interest in having benchmarks. But I think to make those benchmarks worthwhile, you got to get the data back the same day, that you got to have teachers with the opportunity to analyze them. So you allow plenty of teacher flexibility on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis. But every quarter, every 6 weeks, we ought to all be saying, let's come together and see how we're doing in terms of core literacy skills like reading, writing, or mathematics. A couple of other questions, Kathy. What technology support exists that will cut the analysis time for assessments, being able to determine proficiency for particular standards beyond descriptive statistics?
Well, I think that's going to be an answer that will vary by school and by district. There are many districts who have data warehouses that teachers have complete access to from home and from school, and they scan their assessments and are able to get data sliced and diced, in any which way that they desire to have it. And then yet again, there are schools, one that I work with, a district in Colorado, where teachers are scoring their assessments by hand. So it's really dependent on where you're teaching. However, teachers find a way. When they want that information because they know it's critical to their next steps in the classroom, they find a way to assess and to get, to the most valuable data in using whatever technologies they have. Certainly it's great to have, be able to push a button and slice your data. However, it can be done with no technology.
I would just add one other item on technology. It is too easy to be seduced by technology that dumps loads and loads of data on people. It doesn't really help you with analysis. We are, as they say, data-rich and information-poor. Some of the best analysis that I see happening is when teachers still are doing things by hand. I know that sounds terribly antiquated, but what we need to focus on is not the elegance of the presentation, but rather do people actually use it. And constructivist principles that we know about teaching also apply to adults. So don't dismiss that or think that just the giant computer products that are out there are necessarily the solution. It's not a substitute for deep analysis. Before we sign off today, I'd like to ask you to give us your recommendations for future webinars. So if you use your question function to let us know other topics that you're interested in. And one of you also asked about creating a leadership community. Actually, that is a splendid idea, and I'm glad that we both thought of it. One of the things that we're doing differently this year at our Leadership Institute is not to make it an event, but to make it a year-long leadership network. It's going to be an intimate group. It's an opportunity for more conversational one-on-one interaction, but not just in Colorado, but rather continuing throughout the year with one-on-one interaction with you as well as with your leadership team. So I think the idea of a leadership network is a great one, and we'll be doing things precisely for that reason. I also want to, again, welcome your inquiries. Several people have asked about the PowerPoint. It's available at leadandlearn.com, and just click on resources. And you're also welcome to email Kathy and email me directly if you'd like to have more information about today's topic. I think I talked about John Hattie earlier, although my presentations sometimes all pool together in my mind. And let me just tell you, if you haven't heard John Hattie, go hear him. He's a wonderful, engaging presenter, the single best source of research on the planet right now. The new 2012 Visible Learning for Teachers is a gold mine. 250 million students, more than 50,000 studies. It'll settle the issue of what has impact, and best of all, give you ideas for how to create impact for your teachers so that they can measure their own impact. And then, of course, there's the Principal Leadership Institute coming up in July as well, which we will also use for a year-long network. I love your idea of creating networks for leaders. Let me give you a few moments for final questions, and Kathy, I'll give you a chance to add anything you want to say in closing, and I'll see what else we have from our participants. Are there video trainings by John? I don't know is the honest answer to that. I'll find out. People want to know if we can offer these earlier in the day. Actually, we have a large international audience, and so for some people, they're up really early in the morning. We have people participating from India, and it's very late at night. So we've tried to stay in. We chose these times deliberately, but we'll also record these so you can get access to these webinars anytime. We also have people from Vietnam, it says on. Thank you for attending, and I know that it's not a convenient time for you, but we will have a way of having these accessible to you at any time and at any date. A couple of more questions, Kathy, before we run out of time. Would you relate what Kathy shared with doing things for you in terms of leaders taking care of themselves? One of the most important things is the professional learning and the networking opportunities. What would you add to that, Kathy?
In working with principals across the country, I have found that their networking with organizations such as ours have been very helpful, but also establishing really strong bonds with the principals within their own school division. The principalship is a crazy job, and principals need to have peer support as much as possible. And as much as one principal is feeling as though they need that support and not sure if others do, I can assure you that all the principals in the school division and even in neighboring school divisions would benefit greatly from local networks such as that. So I would just simply add that piece to it, that they need to stick together, they need to meet together and talk through the challenges that they have, and it'll be great benefit from doing that.
Well, I do want to thank everybody for your kind attention and for your engagement. Lots and lots of questions today. I'm sorry that we didn't get to all of them, but you're most welcome to continue to participate. There are also resources that you can download at leadandlearn.com, dozens of articles that I've written and a number of other things that my colleagues have done as well. So please take advantage of those, and we look forward to seeing you again. Kathy, thank you for your contributions today.
Yeah, and I would just close with saying that for those principals who expressed great interest in creating a high-performance culture, my book is coming out in a couple of weeks called The Secrets and Simple Truths of Creating a High-Performing School Culture. So I'd just like for them to look for that on our website, and certainly I think it will offer some very clear evidence and advice on how to create a high-performing culture.
And I can vouch for the fact that it is a wonderful book. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Doug.